nervous to talk about this model because it's so different. And when I tell you about it, you may say, you know, wow, this is very different. And I don't know why you're talking about it.
No, on the contrary, we are very, the copers are so weak here, but when you give them the money and they can choose, they become much stronger.
Okay.
So at least as copers, we are very anxious if we can
To hear about
adopt.
us.
They will become maybe.
Okay. So what's radical about this model, if you're a service provider, is that instead of the money from the government going directly to your program, which is the way things work now, right? The average amount of money that the government would have spent on you, if you're a COPER, comes under your control to spend for recovery services, okay? If you're a service provider, you might say, you know, how do I keep my program running if whether or not I get money depends on whether or not COPERs want to buy my services. And all I can say to you is that in the United States healthcare system, that's how people get healthcare. Right? We don't have yet national healthcare like you have. So whether or not a doctor stays in business depends on somebody saying, I have insurance or I have my own money, I know that doctor's good, I'm going to go to that doctor and buy that person's services. All right? So this is a model that makes sense in the United States. I don't know whether it makes sense economically here, but this lady right here has a very good point when she says, what if the system consisted in what we wanted to buy, not what you felt you wanted to provide? Okay? So, and if you're a service provider, I think I'd just ask you to, first of all, I'll tell you, only about 20% of people given an opportunity to use a program like this actually take that opportunity. So the first thing I'll say to all you service providers or administrators of agencies is, most people are not going to go with a model like this. Okay, so therefore you're protected a little bit from free market, we call it in the United States, okay? Which basically means it doesn't exist unless people want to buy it. Right? That's the free market capitalist economy. So that's what this is based on.
20% of the people, you have any, about the population, what kind of people, do you have any?
I'm going to tell you about that. Because in most cases, this model has not been used for people with psychiatric disabilities. It's been used for people with physical disabilities and developmental disabilities. Okay, you use that term here, developmental disabilities. Usually that means people with intellectual disabilities, but it also can mean any disability that has an onset in childhood. Okay. Okay. And not only is this market a free market philosophy, it's also a self-determination philosophy. And are you familiar with the notion of self-determination? It also comes out of the disability rights movement. And it basically talks about people's right to determine their own life, the way they want to live, but with responsibility for the consequences. All right, so that's the nature of this model. So, as I said, funds that would normally go to a provider agency are under the control of the service user. But you can't buy whatever you want. You can't say, I'm going to take my money and I'm going to take a trip to Paris. Okay? That won't work because the money that you have comes from agencies, federal agencies, government agencies, that expect it to be spent on services that will help people recover. All right? So it's not as if you can do anything with the money, but you can often do a lot more with the money than the array of services you might get even from a psychiatric rehabilitation program, which I consider to be the richest array of services, the most responsive types of things that people need with mental illness. So how do you get control of that money? Okay, well first you develop a person-centered recovery plan. Now, Neil Adams came here last year and spoke about person-centered planning, okay? So you know it's not treatment planning, it's not rehabilitation planning. If it's done right, it's about the person's whole life. And only a piece of that life is necessarily going to be helped with any kinds of services, right? But the philosophy is by knowing what the person's goals are for their entire life, the person and service providers can better provide the kinds of services that might help people reach some of those goals. So I might have a goal to be a world traveler. Can mental health services help me with that? No. All right. But part of that goal might be having a passport, might be having symptoms under control so that I can get on a plane without feeling anxious, might be finishing my education so that I know about different countries. Can mental health and psychiatric rehabilitation services help me with that? Yes. All right. And that's why person-centered planning is really important. In this particular case, we're calling it a person-centered recovery plan. That's step one. Step two is the individual budget. All right. And here what's important to know is the budget line items. You know, by line items I mean, you know, I'm going to buy this for this amount of money. I'm going to purchase that for that amount of money. All of those must be related to a recovery goal. All right, that's very, very important. Because otherwise you're just giving people money. And that's not what this model is about. This model is about putting in people's hands more control over what they need to recover from serious mental illness. Staff in this model are called life coaches. They do not deliver mental health services. This is very, very important. All right? They are like, here I would use a term from the United States, they are a broker. They tell you about all the different places you could get services, but because they don't work for any service providers, they have no vested interest in where you go and get your services. Does that make sense to everybody, the notion of a broker? All right. Very important that the broker not work for a particular service provider, because where would you recommend that people go for their services if you work for Agency X? Probably Agency X. All right.
How do they get paid?
Pardon me?
How do they get paid? Do they get paid by the consumer as well?
They get paid. Different models do in different ways. So that's an interesting point. Let's get the model in our heads first, and then we can talk about funding. Because funding is a difficult aspect of this
Who are
model.
the people? What kind of qualifications they need? What kind of qualifications to be?
For the life coaches?
Yeah.
Some people in the United States have worked in programs that have existed for years for folks with developmental disabilities and physical disabilities, so they know how to be brokers of services. What they then need to learn is about the mental health service system. Okay, so that's one qualification.
It's not social worker necessarily.
Another qualification is social workers, rehab providers, a lot of people who are not so happy with delivering services in the old way are very interested in becoming support brokers. All right? But what you have to do if you take a service provider and make a support broker out of them is you have to train out the desire to actually provide the service. All right? Although obviously there's some empathic skills and some counseling skills involved in this, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But you should not be the person's case manager. You should not be who the person calls when there's an emergency. All right? That person should be paying for a case manager. That person should know where to go for emergency services. And then the last part of this model is an independent fiscal intermediary. Think of them as a bank. They exist only to process the money from the funder, in this case usually the federal government, to the individual with a disability. And the other thing that they do is they pay the service providers that the individual hires, all right? In the US, probably here too, there's all kinds of tax laws and withholding of taxes and all kinds of things that most people with disabilities don't want to have to deal with. So the fiscal intermediary also does that for the individual. So these are the 4 key elements of the self-directed care model. And I'm going to say a lot more about them, but is anybody so confused right now, so not following what I'm saying, that I should stop and explain in a general sense any of these 4
I
things?
have a question, but I don't know if that's the place.
That's okay, ask it and we'll deal with it.
If there is
Lack of
lack of
trust.
trust.
Lack of trust.
Lack of trust because the money is not being given directly to the customer.
Okay. That's one of the reasons why this is a model used a lot for people with physical disabilities. No lack of trust, right? No stigma. I mean, that lack of trust, where does that come from? Are most people with psychiatric disabilities not in their right minds most of the time?
No.
No.
Some of the time.
Occasionally, usually for a very brief period of their lives. I mean, I know people that with schizophrenia that haven't been in the hospital for 5 years. All right? Perfectly capable of making decisions. Might need a little help. Might need some suggestions. Might need some program rules. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because this is not a free-for-all. It's not buy whatever you want. So is there a lack of trust? Yes. I mean, that's part of stigma. And that's part of why this model is not as much used in the United States as it is for people with other kinds of disabilities. But what we're finding in the programs where this is being tried is that people with psychiatric disabilities can make good decisions. They can control money and do it responsibly. And in fact, I'll tell you about the 3 programs I have evaluated as a researcher. And do you want to know, these people all have, let's say, $3,000 or $4,000 a year to spend. That's 12 to 16,000 shekels, right? Did I just do that right? Okay. First of all, does that surprise you that that's all we spend on people with serious for 1 year? Does that seem low?
Very low. Very low.
Okay. So 12 to 16,000 shekels a year are spent on the outpatient care of people with serious mental illness. Let me tell you what's not included in that, though. Hospital inpatient care is not included, but a small minority of people use that, all right? Emergency services are not included, all right? And medications are not included. So what this model does, it's called a cash out, CASH-OUT. It cashes out all the other services and places that amount of money in the control of the person in recovery. Do they get $4,000 in the mail? No. Do they even get money handed to them? No. All right? But they do get a debit card so that they can independently spend the money, because part of this model is teaching people to manage things like a debit card and credit. Also part of the model is, let's say for your physical health goal, you want to hire a personal trainer. Do I have the right name there at a gym? Okay. Do you want to take to your personal trainer a check that says, insane person's mental health program? Okay, it's not going to say that, right? But people can figure out what a program is, okay? So part of what this model does is make sure that when people do spend money, they spend it in as normal a way as possible. Okay. So we went from trust, and then we talked a little bit about the costing formula.
And what kind of services they can buy with it?
That becomes the very interesting question, and I'm going to tell you about that in a moment. Because what you'll see is what people buy when they have choices is a little different than what you might expect, and somewhat different than what's available in our traditional mental health system. And I hope you all know that our traditional mental health system is not psychiatric rehabilitation. You know that, right? Okay. I mean, it's very rare to be in a country where there are a lot of outpatient community-based services that are psychiatric rehabilitation oriented. Most people in the public mental health system in the United States get meds if they're lucky, and that's about it. Okay? Only if they're very sick and come to the attention of authorities do they get much more like home visiting services. And so a very small minority of them find their way to a psychiatric rehabilitation program, but they're not well funded in the United States. So it's interesting to see what they get. I'll take a couple more questions and then I'll move on. You and then you.
The government gives the funds, does any function that has to approve the plan? Somebody makes a plan, who has to approve it?
Another excellent point. Generally in these programs, the local entity managing the program does the approval. Okay?
What
So
do you
not
mean
the
by the local
central
entity?
government. Do you have states here?
No.
No. Okay, so do municipalities control the dollars for mental health care?
No, that's the government,
Okay.
but there is
There's
also
some
local,
local,
and
right.
also there are
Districts.
districts that there are people are in charge of districts, and
Are they in
approve-
charge of money too?
They're in charge of the
Some
services.
Okay.
Approving the services.
Here's the way to think about the United States. There's 50 states, there's 50 different mental health systems. Controlled by 50 different states. Some states that think that psychiatric rehabilitation is wonderful and a right, and the state of New Jersey funds 32 peer-run centers. It's a little tiny state, if you've ever seen the state of New Jersey. It has decided that peer-run services as well as traditional services are very, very important. Other states feel that mental illness is a moral failing, an idea back from the 1800s, that people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. If they just take their medication like they're supposed to, they'd get better. So each state is very, very different. Within states are programs, and generally it's a program that makes this decision. But let me talk about some programs, and I think that'll make a little bit more sense to you.
So how much is it self-directed if there is an outside entity that has to approve the plan?
It's not an outside entity. And in a self-directed care program, hopefully at least 50% of the people that review and look at the plan are people in the program. All right? So therefore, you have folks that are actually receiving services, making decisions about whether a budget makes sense, whether that purchase is really tied to a goal. All right? And that's a very important aspect of a program like this. You want to know why? Because the people in the program tend to be the most invested in making sure that there's no irregularities, no fraud, that people are making good decisions, more so than some of us clinicians who might be, easier, we're liberal, we say, yeah, do this, do that. Sometimes consumers, participants in this case, will say, no, this is his third time he's used money to fix his car. That's too much. If he can't make enough money to maintain his car, then he shouldn't have a car, and he should be looking to the program to help him buy a bicycle or something like that. You had a question, and then I'm going to
I
go on.
wanted to ask who refers the consumers to the programs? If it's from the hospitals or?
Generally, the people that come into these programs are already living out in the community. Okay?
How do they know that there is a program? How do they know?
In mental health, these programs are so rare that it's different for each program. But I guess what I would say is, if there's going to be a program, all the mental health outpatient centers are notified, and then people say, I want to get in that program. So self-referral primarily. We don't have a system in the U.S., and you might not either, where there's a lot of referral by doctor. People more take a look at what's available to them and then try to get into whatever program that is. There may be a waiting list. They might not get in for a while. Yes?
The United States is very big.
Right.
You talk about the differences from state to state. What I wanted to ask is the whole concept of peer support and programs for peers, and how much of them is there if you take a general look? Not if you can.
It really varies state to state. It just truly does. I mean, I know you'd like me to tell you something about the U.S. as a whole, but it really, really varies. You have the state of Michigan has 500 certified peer specialists that are working in mental health agencies doing peer-to-peer services, which are different than psych rehab services or traditional clinical services. The state of Arkansas probably has 20. So it's very, very difficult for me to give you an overall.
I think we can say for sure that the state of Israel does very, very, very little.
It appears to be that way to me. I have not been everywhere in Israel. I checked in websites. I think your consumer movement is in the process of formation. And there are, I think, many, many battles and difficult questions and things that are yet to be worked out, including, do we want to provide services, or do we want to be a social movement? Do we want to be certified peer specialists and then the government can pay us, or will that co-opt us and make us just like traditional providers? These are all things that have been debated and talked about in the U.S. consumer movement for years. And so, yes, you're not as far along in some ways. In the other sense, you have a smaller country, and you can learn from the other consumer movements and hopefully avoid some of the infighting and so forth and so on. Some of these programs, one of them in Pennsylvania, all of the life coaches are peers. All right. In other programs, none of the life coaches are peers. But in all of the programs, none of the life coaches provide services. That's what's really, really important here. So I'm going to skip some of this. We talked about a person-centered recovery plan, the fact that it's not just about services, it's about the person's whole life, and also that it needs to focus on the person's circle of support. Are you familiar with the circle of support notion? Okay. And if the person doesn't have a circle of support, which I know is often the case, the focus is on how to help the individual build one. We have the individual budget. Many people get hung up on the budget. How do you do it? How, blah, 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 blah. Let me just tell you that all these programs have what's called a purchasing policy. And it lays out what you can and cannot buy. All right? And in many cases, one of the things I haven't told you yet about self-directed care programs is that because the money is more flexible, you can buy traditional services, but you can also spend your money on goods and non-traditional services if you can show that those are related to a recovery goal. So here's an example.
Guitar. Buying guitar.
Pardon me?
Buying guitar.
Playing guitar, buying a guitar. Okay, just because you want a guitar?
No.
Because you are thinking of making it into a business, maybe. Let's see your business plan. Let's see if you have some talent, so forth and so on. A more traditional example would be, I have no suit to interview for a job, or I have no decent clothing. I would like to buy clothing. In the United States, maybe you've heard this, maybe you'll laugh, our public health insurance will pay to remove all your teeth, but it will not pay to buy you dentures. Okay? I'm sure you have some weird things like this here. So, are you going to get a job if you go for a job interview and you have no teeth? No. So that's a medical need that you might purchase. It's a non-traditional mental health service, all right? But it's something that you might purchase. There's an emphasis on spending money on normative things and not on services unless that's what the person wants. And I'm going to go forward because I want to give you examples of this. I think it will help concretize it. We talked about the support broker, not a service provider, there to guide the person They're to help them think about not just services they might want to purchase, but these other non-traditional things that might help them reach their goals toward recovery. Okay? Here's this notion of service substitutions, replacing a formal service with an informal service. Here's an example in the United States. Many mental health centers have vans. Vans, car vans that drive around and pick people up, right? You're on the van schedule. The vans sometimes don't come. The vans aren't very convenient. What you might prefer to do is use your money and pay your neighbor to drive you to a place that you want to go to. All right? That might even be cheaper than a van. So that's an example of replacing a formal service, your agency's van, with an informal service. Okay? Are you going to get monitored? That money actually went to your neighbor, that your neighbor actually drove you somewhere? Yes, everybody's going to have to be accountable for how the money got spent. However, you now have more flexibility in terms of your coming and your going. Replacing services with normal community activities. Let's say your agency has a Let's Lose Weight group, all right? Do you have Weight Watchers here?
Yes.
Okay. Would you rather go to a mental health agency's Let's Lose Weight group, or would you rather be in Weight Watchers? I'd rather have neither of those, but if it's one or the other, Weight Watchers is a normal community activity. If that's what you want to do, you can use your money for that. Replacing public services with private. See, here I'm gonna lose you because everything here is public, right? No. All
I
right.
have also private.
You have also private. Is the private sometimes better than the public?
Yes.
Okay. So here's an example in the United States that it's sad, it's a shame, but in the United States, many psychiatrists have no training in trauma. You use that word here, right? Okay. Many people with mental illness have experienced trauma. In childhood, many of them experienced it when they were in inpatient treatment. Many of them are poor and come from backgrounds where they have trauma. So if you would prefer to find a psychiatrist that has experience in trauma treatment, whatever it is, and it costs more money than the public psychiatrist you could purchase, that's your decision to use your money to purchase the psychiatrist that has the skills that you want. Okay. So that's replacing public with private, and then finally replacing services with goods. All right. So you may be in a supported employment program that has a Let's Get Ready for Work element, which is really important, but part of Let's Get Ready for Work doesn't have, can't buy you clothes. So that would be an example of replacing a service with a good. These service substitutions are very important, but they're also part of what makes the program controversial, all right? Because you open up the paper someday and some reporter has written an article that says, oh, people in the da-da-da X program are using health dollars to go purchase lovely outfits, all right? That's not really what's going on, but that's how the reporter has made it an interesting story and brought a lot of attention to the program. So while this actually is a great ingredient for helping people do better, it also puts the programs at risk. And you can all see that, right? Okay. When I first started in psych rehab, the very existence of psych rehab was treated that way. Oh, they're giving people nice apartments to live in. Wouldn't we all like a nice apartment? For example, was what was said about psych rehab. Oh, they're giving people jobs. How come anybody can't get a job there? So a lot of this has to do with public attitudes and perceptions. So how well does this work? This is a research study that was a big major study done by the federal government on a program called Cash and Counseling. It was focused on people with physical disabilities and developmental disabilities. People were randomly assigned to get cash and counseling or to get services as usual. This was our first piece of evidence, but not for people with mental illness, that this model was very, very successful. Okay, so that's how well it works for that population. Right now in the United States, we have 6 self-directed care programs, all right, which isn't many. And this shows you what reluctance there has been in the United States to embrace this model. I would say about 30 states are in various phases of planning a self-directed care program. Generally what a state does is it does a small pilot program of about 100 people to see how it goes and see if it's doable. And that's what all of these started as small pilot programs in different states in the United States. I'm going to tell you a little bit more to give you a flavor for what these programs look like by focusing on a program that I've been studying called the Texas Self-Directed Care Program. You all know the state of Texas, cowboys and George Bush, and huge, huge state, okay? Spends millions and millions of dollars on people with mental illness, primarily because it's got a lot of people in the state. It actually right now spends on average, somebody multiply 2,500 by 4. That's how many shekels it spends on people. It spends
So it's
very
about
few.
10,000.
10,000.
No?
Okay, 10,000 a year on outpatient treatment for people with mental illness, not including inpatient care, medications, and emergency services. So you might ask yourself, what can you do with that amount of money? When we started this project, the state was richer, and on average, they were spending $4,000 a year, all right, on people with outpatient services. So that's what people had to spend in this program. And now let me introduce you to a concept called budget neutrality, all right? So budget neutrality means one of the reasons self-directed care programs are actually acceptable to many people is you say, I would have spent $4,000 on him anyway, okay? I'm going to give him $4,000. I'm going to make sure he doesn't spend more than $4,000. Therefore, where's the risk? Okay, he's not going to break the bank. This is a budget neutral program when it's designed as a replacement service. Right? That makes conservatives, fiscal conservatives in our country very, very happy. And let me tell you a secret about the people in this program. There's 100 of them. If you want to guess on average what they spend each year? It's pretty good. Less than half the amount. Okay. They treat these funds as if they can bank them, and they actually can't bank them. If they don't spend them in a year, they're gone. But they are so conservative, they're so careful with their funds that, the notion of fraud and the notion that people will overspend, of course there's always going to be a few people that overspend and go out and use their debit card and buy a 6-pack of beer or whatever. That happens in any program. There's fraud in traditional programs, all right? But by and large, folks turn out to be very responsible with the money they're given. But remember, there's a purchasing policy and there's a budget that's approved. There's a lot of stuff that's done before money is put in people's hands or people are able to go out and hire a personal trainer or buy a Weight Watchers membership. So in Texas, people need to leave their traditional services and enroll in the SDC program. But many of them turn around and purchase services from the same providers. Not all, but many. Many people hold on to their psychiatrist. But one thing very few people purchase, which you'll see in a moment, is case management. Okay? And that is something, and remember, case management can mean something very different in the United States than it might mean here. Yes?
When people have money and they don't want to spend it.
Well, remember, they don't have money now,
Well,
right?
they do, as far as they're concerned, they have money.
Well, they have a debit card that gets loaded
That's right.
bit by
As
bit.
far as they're concerned, you just said, they treat it as if they can bank it. Now, when people have money, a lot of times we know that they skip meals, they don't get the right medication, they don't spend it on very essential things. So, isn't it the same here? Where
No.
a person would actually be better off in the long run, in their mental health and in their recovery, if they would spend all the money. But they don't spend the money, so they skip services. It's as if they're skipping meals. So they're still getting to the end of the day.
Okay,
But they're
now-
not getting everything they can.
if that was happening, wouldn't we expect to see poor outcomes for those people? Right? If they're skipping meals and they're not getting services they need, right?
Maybe there's
Okay.
different
So as long
yeah.
as we know the outcomes are as good as or
Okay.
better, then what are we learning about what it costs some people to recover? All right? Would we like to give them more money? Absolutely. I'd like to give them as much money as they need. I don't know about your country, but in my country, one of the major problems with people with severe mental illness is poverty. All right? So that is, I think, the biggest challenge for running a self-directed care program is people want to spend it on things that are needed direly, but can't be part of a recovery plan. All right, like feeding your child. You're not allowed to spend self-directed care monies on feeding your child. Right? But, you know, your question is very good, and this is one of the arguments people have about, you know, if they underspend, they won't use services. And they use services, they use different services, and they don't spend all the money, and they have good outcomes or better outcomes than traditional services.
Maybe it just means that the traditional service is not very good.
That may be.
But,
That may be.
I want to say something to Guy about the thing you said. It's like there are two different approaches here. I know from here. One approach says, let's give people as many services as we can, bundle them up in services so they will be safe and they have everything for every area. And there is a different approach saying, no, let's give services a bit by bit and only if needed and only when there is a shortage and the person is in need, then we'll give the service. So I think it's the same dilemma here. You say, let's give more, so for sure the outcome will be better.
well, more, they don't have so much money. I mean, it's not, they're
But
spending
nevertheless, even here in
$2,000.
Israel, many times we give consumers too many services.
I don't, that's
in Montana,
Okay, so
$2,000.
we all agree, and I want to give a little more of my presentation, and I'm going to take more questions, because I can tell this is an excited group, and, but you're tapping in to some major questions that are going on in the United States, that's for sure, okay? Too many services, not the right kinds of services, agencies having to do things because of regulations that the agency doesn't want to do, nor do consumers want to do. Do you have an agency like that, where you're doing things that you think are stupid, consumers don't want to use the service, but you're basically doing it because of a federal regulation or because of some weird mixture of means and ends? Anybody sociologists in this crowd? You know, at the beginning, the means are connected with the ends, but sometimes it just becomes about the means, and they no longer accomplish the ends, but the organization is used to having the da-da-da group. Even though it's a stupid group, no one comes to it, but it's what the organization does. So,
Go on, go
well,
on.
hold on, let me go on.
Yes.
Let me go on. Okay, so this program is a collaboration of my center, my academic center, and the state of Texas, the people in charge of mental health services. So these people have more people with serious mental illness in their state than you have in your country, okay? Because it's one of those huge states, all right? And they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on care. A lot of it inpatient, all right, and a lot of it on nursing home care. Most people are out in the community. Remember with deinstitutionalization, wasn't the money supposed to follow the people out in the community? Did that happen here? No. Okay, so what we're doing now is fighting to get that money out into the community. I'm going to skip this part because it's about funding, but basically one of the challenges that you might not have that we have in the United States is public mental health is funded partly by the federal government and partly by state general revenue, taxes that the state levies on people. And those funding streams need to be braided. And by braided, I mean they need to be combined, but like the individual strands of a braid, at the end of the process, you need to be able to determine which money went. Does that make sense to you? You can't just throw it all in a pot and not account at the end. So the state will pay for a suit. Okay? Medicaid, our federal health insurance program for poor people, will not pay for a suit. So we have to make sure that the record keeping can account for that. One of the agencies that does that well in the United States is managed care. You have managed care here? No. You have private insurance companies though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And do they always act in the best interest of the patients? No. Do they make a profit here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that's managed care in the United States. So there's the question there of when decisions are being made, you know, who's benefiting? In this case, that's not operative. The managed care company is just the banker. They don't make any decisions about what people buy, who gets in the program. They just pass the money through. But because this area where we started this program had managed care, they were all set up to be the banker. What are some other bankers that have been used in mental health self-directed care programs? Universities have served as bankers because they have fiscal structures to push money through. Developmental disability cooperatives, I don't know if you have those. Really, anything that already has a pre-existing financial structure can serve as the banker. Doesn't need to be related to social service at all. So in this case, it's a managed care company. We built this program from the ground up by working with the community. So we brought together family members, people in recovery, service providers, religious leaders, civic leaders, the mayor and the state senator, and we planned the program together based on the principles of self-directed care. Was it hard? Yes. Did it give the community investment in the program? Yes. Does the community feel comfortable with some of the decisions that are getting made financially in the program? Yes, because they help design the purchasing policy, they help determine who would be let into the program, so forth and so on. These are the committees that we formed in order to design the program. And the design of the program is detailed in an article that we published in Psychiatric Rehabilitation Journal. I put this up here just to show that if you put a program together like this, it takes a little bit more time, but you get community buy-in, consumer buy-in, provider buy-in, local neighbor buy-in. Because it's an unusual program and because it's subject to raised eyebrows and people saying, what's that program really doing? The more you open the program, make it transparent, the better it is for the program in the long run. We use a lot of technology. There's a website that the program members can access, and on that website are all the services and the amounts of money that they cost. All right, so to the copers in the room, do you know what your psychiatrist costs per 15-minute increment? Or to the service providers in the room, do you know what your agency gets paid for an hour of case management service or an hour of job coach service? Probably not, right? You know your salary, all right, but you don't know who's charging what for what. Right? And one of the things in a self-directed care program is if people are going to purchase services, they need to know what they're purchasing. So for the first time, people are finding out things like, that's what 15 minutes of meeting with a psychiatrist costs, or that's what a case manager costs, or that's what medication management costs. And people go to the website. They can also meet one-on-one with a support broker and look at this information, but that's how they put their budget together. And you can go to our website, I'll give you the address, and you can see what people are purchasing. They can buy peer services, they can buy a personal trainer, they can buy a dietitian, they can go to a cooking class, all right? So that's important in terms of technology, and there's other ways. The use of the Allow card, all right, which is a debit card that can be controlled. It's actually a debit card that was created for parents to give allowances to their children, all right? So it's a little, you don't have anything like that? You don't have debit cards, okay. So it's like a credit card, except money is loaded onto it, and when you've spent the money, you can't use the card again. All right, yes?
Do you have a lot of donation treatment?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
Do you have also
kinds of alternative treatment therapy?
Yes.
Yes, also.
Yes, so you can buy massage or acupuncture
Yes.
and those types of things. For some reasons related to insurance, you can't buy herbs. Okay, so you can't buy, what are some, St. John's wort or that type of thing, but yes, you can purchase that. If you can relate it to a recovery goal, okay? Not just because you want it, but because you can show that getting a massage
But
is,
is it related to the system? Those kind of therapy?
well, it's a non-traditional service.
Yes.
It's something that the state would be paying for when the braid gets unraveled, but you can purchase it.
Alternative therapy.
Could you get a massage every day? No, probably not. Probably only Oprah or who do you have here that's real rich and probably gets a massage every day? Movie stars and things like that. So again, you know, there would be a look at why you're purchasing it and how it's helping you recover. But you know, if one of your problems was fibromyalgia and depression, all right, and that would seem to me to be something that most programs would approve.
Alternative therapy, horseback riding, or things like that.
We haven't had anybody ask for that, but that would certainly be, there's actually an evidence base about that. So, yes, it opens up what will be paid for. All right, so there's a lot of technology, and you can read about it. There's the website. There's a chat room called the SDC Forum. The great thing about that is participants can get online and exchange information about Dr. So-and-so is not so good, or this therapist was absolutely fantastic, or, you know, don't sign up for this individual because I've heard he's leaving and going to go, you know, to another place, going to move out of the country or whatever. Here's the notion of the braiding that goes on. This program is actually braiding 4 different funding streams. And again, the braiding is allowing for the traditional and non-traditional services to be purchased. No one funder would pay for all of that. And most programs have a guideline for what percent have to be traditional and what percent can be non-traditional. And this program has a 60-40 guideline. So the members of this program are asked to spend 60% of their budget on traditional services, psychiatrists, therapists. In the United States, we consider a peer service to be traditional, so they can purchase a peer service, and then 40% on non-traditional services. If you were doing fantastic in the program and your mental health was really good and you wanted to do a different percentage, again, you'd have to put your budget through and you'd have to explain why. You'd probably be allowed to do that. So it's a guideline. All right? If we had no guidelines, in many cases, people would spend hardly any money on mental health services. And that's not the purpose of the program. The purpose of the program is to help people recover, not to use the money to become non-poor. All right? So, but given the interlocking nature of poverty and mental health problems, that can be a big challenge. Peer support is really important in this model. People who are in mental health recovery can act as support brokers. In our program, one of the support brokers is a peer. Also, people can purchase peer-to-peer services, which I gather is not something that happens right now. And isn't going to happen, probably, unless peers decide to pursue certification. So I heard about one thing today that I thought was kind of interesting, which is peers can pursue, if you guys get it, psychiatric rehabilitation certification, correct? All right. So that might be the first step toward peers providing certified services. In the U.S., the peer community decided they wanted their own certification. That doesn't mean that some peers don't hold both. A CPS, a certified peer specialist certification, as well as in the United States, we call it a CPRP, certified rehabilitation, psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner. All right. We're doing a randomized study, very important. If we don't randomize it, our government doesn't believe it. And even if we do randomize it, our government sometimes decides they don't want to pay for whatever it is. But we're evaluating it in that way. partly we want to use the same design that was used in the cash and counseling big study of people with physical disabilities, because it changed the nature of services for people with those disabilities. So we're hoping the use of the model will do the same thing. Here's a look at the folks that are in the Texas program. I don't know what you can really make of it. I don't know. Very few are working, but 60% see themselves as being able to hold a job in the next year. Their average age is age 40. Most are unmarried. Just a look at who's in the program. Here's a look at what a person's purchasing. And to me, it really isn't until I actually look at what people's goals are and what their budgets look like that I finally get a feel for what the program is like. So this individual's first goal was to find a prescribing psychiatrist with whom she felt comfortable, right? She didn't feel comfortable with her current psychiatrist. To participate in supportive psychotherapy so she could cope better. In the U.S., very few people with serious mental illness get psychotherapy. Do they get it here?
No.
Okay. Some do, some don't. Okay. Again, another use of psychotherapy for many people is for trauma. Right. Improve my health and physical fitness. I don't know if your country is waking up to the fact that medical comorbidities with serious mental illness are very, very serious. In the U.S., you heard our people die on average 25 years earlier than the general population. Okay. You'll see in a moment that this is one of the most frequent purchases, is for this. Better manage my feelings of depression. All right, now she means self-manage, not, she's not saying my psychiatrist is going to help my depression. That will probably help if her psychiatrist prescribes antidepressants and she wants to take them. But she also wants to better manage them herself. Lower my stress level, prepare myself for a job. Now do you want to see what she purchased? So this is over a 4-month period. She got individual therapy for that amount of money. She found a psychiatrist with whom she felt comfortable and purchased psychiatric time. She had to get an initial mental health assessment for the psychiatrist because that was required, so she purchased that. She joined a gym. She bought some workout clothes and a gym bag. She got massage therapy, whoever was asking about that. Stress level, that was what was the connection for her. Tuition was paid for, related to the job that she hopes to get. Okay. Books for school, related to the job that she's hoping to get, and her debit card fees. Okay, people are responsible for their debit card fees. You pay your Visa fees, right? I mean, part of this is you're using your budget for the kinds of things that you would use in a regular life. Okay? So she spent 45% on non-traditional services, 55% on traditional services, pretty close to the 60-40 split. This program is not a hard and fast, it has to be 60, it has to be 40. It just has to be mostly.
How much money she has for a month?
Take 4,000 and divide it by 12.
$4,000?
Yeah, $4,000 divided by 12.
But this doesn't cover the whole month, she's $75. No, for 4 months.
But it's good for a year, the membership to the gym, no?
Yep.
So that's, divide that by 12.
Now you're thinking budgets, aren't you? Right? Isn't this fun? All right, so she's not going to buy a gym membership every quarter, right? I don't know what she'll do in terms of tuition, but let's assume she took one
Probably a
class.
semester.
But what's the problem? We see right away, right? If she spends at this rate, she's going to run out of money, right? Okay. So her support broker, when she made this budget, pointed that out to her. She knows that that's the case, all right? She's already backed out the money for the things she knows she's going to want, which includes basically the psychiatrist, Okay, she knows she wants to hold on to that. She also wanted to hold on to her individual therapy. She's not going to get another initial mental health assessment. But whose responsibility is it for her to end up at the end of the year under $4,000? Hers, but also her support brokers to help watch and make sure everything's okay. If she gets to the, they're not going to let her get to the last quarter with all her money spent. Right? So when people talk about, people going out and blowing all their money, they can't. All right? They're not holding the money to begin with. The managed care company is paying for the individual therapist. And in terms of all of these things, that money was loaded onto her debit card, purchase by purchase, after it was approved. Okay? So I think this concretizes a little bit for you. Here's a look at some of the people that are in the program, and I guess I want to start by telling you about this woman. If you go to the website, it's at the end of this presentation, you can actually read her story. But she had bipolar disorder and an addiction problem that had lasted for quite a long time. She was introduced to crack cocaine by her mother. I mean, we're talking about a very, very dysfunctional family. She was treated for substance abuse addiction for many, many years before her bipolar disorder was ever diagnosed. So the two, this has happened a lot in Israel, the two were so intermingled that it was very, very difficult to figure out, which came first and which to treat. And one of the first things that she purchased, because she had a trauma history, was a psychiatrist who had a trauma background, and psychotherapy, which she was not getting. And this private psychotherapist was actually willing to come to the house to start, because, as I'm sure many of you know, many trauma survivors have a lot of difficulty leaving the house. And she eventually, she had setbacks. She went back to school. She became a licensed addiction counselor, right? And she's now working for an addiction program. Right? What's nice about Chelsea is because she had some convictions for a drug history. In the U.S., if you have convictions like that, one of the few places that you can end up working for is a substance abuse treatment program. Right? So she was lucky in that she was interested in that. So she's one of these classic success stories. She, conquered addiction and found therapy that worked for her and got a license, and now she's working. Cleveland, who's a little hard to see, he's African American and the background is kind of dark, is an elderly gentleman who, when he first started working with the program, didn't like to leave his apartment because it was in a dangerous neighborhood and it was the only place he could afford to live. He also had congestive heart failure, so found it difficult to walk. So Cleveland didn't go off and get a job and certification and so forth and so on, but he did learn to walk to the library to use the computer. He then was able to purchase a computer through the program. One of the other big things that people want is a computer. Another thing a lot of people use their money for is a cell phone, because they are not in touch with family and relatives. Do they get a cell phone because they need a cell phone? No. They get a cell phone because socialization is one of their goals, or because reuniting with their family in another state is one of their goals. And generally what the program will do with cell phones, because everyone wants one, is work with the individual, giving them financial education, which I talked about this morning, to start planning for how can you figure out how to pay for your own cell phone so you can use your self-directed care monies to purchase some other neat things that'll be your next step. And Cleveland, from being on the computer, joined a gym class for older folks, where we can have congestive heart failure, but it's not on the treadmill, obviously. He's sitting and doing some working out. And he was actually able to buy, I think he bought a used car. All right. He's much happier. He's much less depressed. He's not your classic story of, went out and got a job and did all these wonderful things. But his mental health is good and he's happy. And he's not spending any more money than would have been spent on him in the traditional system. Genevieve is a woman who started her own small business with self-directed care. That would have been hard. She also changed therapists. She kept her psychiatrist. She really liked her psychiatrist. She was homeless when she first came into the program. So one of the things the program gave her was a down payment. You have to have down payments when you rent an apartment? Okay. So now this is an important thing. The program will not pay for your monthly rent. All right? That's not a mental health service. But if moving to a better apartment is part of your recovery plan, they will pay for the down payment. All right? And if you get into an emergency situation and can't pay your rent, the purchasing policy of this program is they will one time only pay your rent. All right? People said, well, why not two? And the participant members of the purchasing policy committee said, no, after two it'll be three, and after three it'll be four. And why do we have the rule about not using this money for rent if we're going to break it all the time? They came up with all kinds of rules. You can buy only one belt a year. I don't understand that. Maybe people were buying a lot of belts. Each purchasing policy is unique to the program that creates it. And that's kind of neat because you can then do a self-directed care program with people that have a variety of different kinds of needs, and they can tailor it to what makes sense for people to buy. Let me see. This is a quote from one of the self-directed care participants, the one in Florida, not the Texas program, just talking a little bit about the fact that owning your life, having control of your life, and self-determining is really what lets you reconnect with having a life, giving you a reason to want to recover. Let's face it, recovery is an incredible amount of hard work. That's why a lot of folks say, my clients, they just don't want to do anything, and they're apathetic, and they're this, or they sabotage their own rehabilitation, whatever. It's an incredible amount of work to recover, and there has to be some kind of reason and motivation. And one of the things I think that this program does is gives people back a little more, in this case not a huge amount more, but gives people some more control over their recovery by letting them control their service dollars. These are some materials about self-directed care, a planning guide for if you wanted to start a self-directed care program. There's a lot of material out there on how to run these programs. But as you can see, we have a big country in the United States, and how many programs did I say we had? 7 or 6? I can't remember. Whatever it was. They're not in every state. So the issue about trust, the issue about can people make responsible decisions about what services to choose, those are all very important issues and concerns, I think, that people have about using this model with people in mental health recovery. But I can also tell you that in all of those programs, hundreds of people are self-directing their recovery, spending money, spending it responsibly. So clearly, for some group of folks, this is a model that has a lot of promise. So now I'm going to stop and take all of the questions that you have and also see what kinds of things are going on in Israel that make this a model that would work or wouldn't work. And, sorry about that. Let's just turn this off. What was your question?
It was from before, but I'm wondering if it's still relevant. I was just wondering if part of what works so well in this program is giving people the responsibility. In other words, it could have been anything. It could be any type of program. The minute you give someone their responsibility for their own recovery, then it will be successful, no matter what program it is, as long as it's something that's self-directed and that they feel that they're taking responsibility for.
Right, and that is the principle of self-determination. Now, this program gives people a lot of responsibility, right? But in your work, in your programs, the more you can struggle to give people more choices and more responsibility, the more likely many of them will feel that, will feel trusted, will feel like they can make decisions. Most of our mental health system in the U.S. is built around telling people that they're sick, they're disabled, they need to be watched, they need to be cared for, they're not good decision makers. They're treated as if having psychosis or symptoms is something that happens 24 hours a day when in most people's illnesses is actually a blip on the radar screen. So this is a way to start giving a different message to people. But it can also be frightening to folks. Yes?
Did you see in the areas that the self-directed care was implemented, the services were better? Do you see an influence on the services? Does the services want to be better or be more?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. All right, were the services better? All right, certainly the people that purchased them think they were better. All right, and we asked them, compared to the services that you were getting before you came into the program, do you think these are better? And they normally say yes, but wouldn't people say that? I mean, when you purchase a car and someone says, what do you think of your car?
I think the question was, did the traditional services, because they knew there's an STC program in the area, they strive to get better because they want people to buy their services?
That's an interesting question. All right, they did change the delivery of services. So at one agency, if you saw the prescribing psychiatrist, you had to spend a half hour in a medication group that was led by a nurse. Okay, that was the only way you could get to see the psychiatrist. The people in the STC program looked and said, well, that group costs X and the psychiatrist costs Y, I don't want X. And so we said to the program, he wants to buy Y, he doesn't want to buy X. The program at first didn't like that, but in the end, they decided to allow it. Okay, so they changed in that way. Right? I think one of the things that this program does is it forces programs to unbundle their services, which is the comment made by the woman sitting back against the wall. And unbundling can be a problem for a program because bundling services is sometimes the way that it survives. Which brings me back to the idea that we're not talking about a model that is going to apply, in most cases, to 100% of the people. It's a model that's selectively used by people that feel they're ready for something like this. Yeah.
Can you say that this model started with developmental
And physical.
and physical and now it is being applied on people with mental illness. Is it being applied with some people have multiple disabilities, developmental and psychiatric disability? Has it been applied on?
I'll tell you, so the question was, is this model being used for people with both mental illness and developmental disability? And the answer to that is, if their primary diagnosis is developmental disability, they're getting access to it, and many of those people have a secondary mental health problem. But if their primary problem is mental health, then there's no special, access to it because they also have a developmental disability. I will say that the people that use this model in the developmental disability field often get a lot of help from family members. Right, because of the math involved, and they're part of the circle of support, and because a lot of folks with developmental disabilities are just more comfortable and used to making these kind of decisions with family members. So I just wanted to share that, because that's from the developmental disability literature. Yeah.
There's something that I asked about before. It sounds like there are more expenses that are not in the. I mean, there's the oversight, there are the coaches. There's other things. I mean, there's the financial bureaucracy. I mean, doesn't the state actually spend more money on that?
No, it doesn't.
So how does that compute?
Well,
Who pays for that?
in most programs, the support broker fee is part of what people purchase. Okay, so that's what pays for the support broker. And
Do they have to purchase it? This is something that they have to
yeah,
purchase,
they have
right?
to purchase because someone
So
has
it's
to
part of
review
their-
their budgets and so forth and so on. It isn't a hard sell because they want to be in the program. This program, the Texas program, because it was a research project, we had money to pay for the program infrastructure. So we didn't organize it in that way. But a truly budget neutral program would be truly budget neutral. Okay? You could also take out a little piece of administrative money to pay the managed care company to be the banker if you wanted to. Yes.
you said that it's only for people with some degree of readiness for such a process. So how do we have a criteria for accepting people to the program?
Okay, I
Or
didn't
how do
say
you-
readiness, okay?
So, but everybody can, everybody who wants can get into the program, or do you have some screening out of people?
For this program, anyone who wanted to get in the program could get in. What I was alluding to is that people tend to self-select into the program. So if they don't like math, for example, and they hear about the program and they hear they have to do budgets and things like that, they tend to say, I'm not interested in a program like that. If they're thrilled with all of their help, their services, they tend to say, well, I'm happy with the services I'm getting, and to self-select out. You know, sure, some people are probably more ready to do that, but that hasn't, you know, the principle of supported employment, anybody can come into a supported employment program, they don't have to say they're ready. That's the principle with self-directed care.
Zero exclusion.
Zero exclusion. I will say, though, that self-directed care programs don't tend to take people who have representative payees, people that control their money, okay? Because the whole recovery notion is having control of your money. And if you're not able to manage even a little bit of money, then you're probably not a good candidate for this program. So I think I would say self-select. I would also say in some of these research projects, people that didn't appear ready were ready. But you know that about psychiatric rehabilitation anyway, right? I mean, you probably all worked with somebody the first day they walked into your office who said, he'll never live independently, or I can't see how she'll ever get a job, or whatever, and then they surprised you. So the same thing happens here. But it's not a program for everybody.
Is there an issue with families? Like, what do you do if the client wants a certain service and the family member wants another service? Do you have
See, my perception of what I heard today is many people with serious mental illness in the United States are more separate from their families than is maybe the case here. The notion is to become independent. Our NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, you have NAMI here too, right? Not so much, okay. I mean, that was one of their major pushes, was this notion that you and your child shouldn't live together for your entire life. So families have differing, you know, attitudes toward this. If your client is in a drug-using, poverty-stricken family, they're going to try to go after the money, okay? If they're in a supportive, you know, wanting to help you grow and, you know, whatever it takes, you know, some families go, oh, I don't know about this, because their view of the individual is more protective, and they've seen a lot of bad decisions. Okay, that's what families sometimes see.
No, but sometimes you see that a lot of families are pushing the person into services that he's not ready
That they don't, right.
necessarily want.
Right.
We didn't see here, like, that you said it was some people in the community, but I didn't see anything about spending money on living, like in a hostel or in a supportive.
Right, because this money could not be spent for that.
Could not be.
Yeah, in the United States, residential money is a separate pot of
I
money.
see that's a big issue.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, if you were gonna do this in Israel, you would have to figure out what you wanted to cash out. That's the big question in a program. What do you want to cash out? You don't have to cash out the whole tomato of services, all right? What you want to try to avoid is what some programs do is they do self-directed care with additional money. New money on top of the existing services. The problem with that, at least in most countries, is it's never going to fly because you're never going to be able to take it large scale. There is no extra money to give people. Right? So the whole budget neutral idea is part of this, but I'm not saying you would need to cash out everything. All right? You could cash out certain pieces. How about any other questions that people have? Yes.
Do you have people with guardianship?
I'm sorry?
People with guardianship.
Generally not so much, because generally if they are guardianships, then they're not in control of their own money, and the model tends to operate on the recovery impetus is controlling the money. You could do it. There's people that have proposed that you could do it, and through the guardian you could operate in a way that would be more empowering, more self-determining, but I'm not aware of any programs that are actually doing it. The one thing I'm surprised nobody's brought up is substance users. Substance
Don't
abuse.
say
Because that
In
is what.
Israel,
In Israel, substance abuse is different.
Right, but don't a lot of the people that you serve have substance abuse problems?
No, not like in the US.
Not like in the
No,
US.
okay.
Not at all.
It's not because they don't exist, it's because they are gatekeepers. They
They're in
don't
another
go
treatment
inside the
system? Okay.
system.
All right, well, in our
They
country,
are calling.
yeah, in our country, they're in the mental health system. And so there's a set of issues about will they use this money to buy drugs and alcohol and so forth and so on. And you're back to your purchasing policy. Yeah, they might do it once, but that'll be the last time. Because with this debit card, and I'm sorry the debit card isn't as familiar to you guys, but you can go online and see what got purchased, all right? And if the person was supposed to go off and get a suit and you see a charge at the da-da-da bar, then that card gets canceled immediately, all right, and yanked from the person. So you don't get too many chances to mess up in that way. But that's a big issue in the United States because of the co-occurrence of mental health and substance use problems. So what do you think? Is there a future for this model here?
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah?
I also think it's wonderful. It's a total change of perception. Instead of seeing the person as passive, as someone who needs to be, like a child, others should prescribe for him what's good, he gets a choice. But I don't know if it will pass on the government and the authorities.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you that there is a demand on the part of the disability movement in Israel to have, and what it's called here is individual budgets, okay? And so people are starting to talk about it, all right? But I don't know what the future will bring either. I can't tell you what the future will bring in the United States, but I do know that some of us researchers are trying to create an evidence base to see whether or not it's effective. And it's not the answer, okay? It doesn't take people and automatically make them well again or make everyone recover. But it does have some power, and people do like it. I've never seen either in the physical disability, developmental disability, or mental illness area where you looked at satisfaction with the model where you didn't see much higher satisfaction. But some of that can be self-selection. Obviously, people choose to come into the program. Okay. I want to thank all of you for coming.